Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. It's really exciting to know that we have participants, not just from Massachusetts or the New England region, but beyond and across the whole country. So I want to thank you for joining us today. You know, it wasn't until fairly recently that I didn't think much about why my lights turned on or how my heating system was able to heat our home. But the story behind these aspects of our everyday lives it is not only interesting, it's fundamental to transforming our energy system to meet the challenges and the opportunities of that transformation. Melissa Birchard, our keynote speaker, is just the person to help us navigate the system as it exists today and talk about the changes that are necessary to achieve that critical transformation. Melissa is the Director for Power Grid Reform at Acadia Center. She holds a law degree from Georgetown Law Center and has had extensive experience working on energy issues and energy policy. She began her legal career focused on FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and state energy policy from the consumer side perspective. This presentation will give you an overview of the agencies that determine how energy policy is developed, the specific agencies behind all the acronyms and their distinct roles, and how the existing framework of energy procurement and transmission is in need of reform to transition to renewable energy. Melissa, welcome. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Lana. I'm glad to be here today. I will caution that the webinar is on New England specifically, so I hope that folks are interested in talking about barriers that exist specifically in New England to the energy transformation, and we're going to focus on the regional level as opposed to the state level. Apologize if my voice is a little hoarse today. As Lana said, my name is Melissa Birchard, and I work at a nonprofit called Acadia Center. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, I hope that you can see that. So moving on to the second slide. Acadia Center is a New England-wide organization that works to advance clean energy and decarbonization through research, advocacy, and partnerships. I want to start by raising the question that I hear most often, which is why do I work on regional energy issues in New England, and why do regional energy decisions matter? A few of the reasons that regional decisions matter is that they can lead to more polluting power plants in our communities that affect our health and our quality of life. They currently fail to consider the impacts of pollution and climate change, including impacts on vulnerable communities. And they present a barrier to building a clean energy economy and to clean jobs in New England. In terms of some of the key issues that we're seeing at the regional level right now, one main concern driving reform is the realization that regional policies and practices are standing in the way of achieving state clean energy and decarbonization goals. Many of those goals are set out in state laws around the region, but they have not been part of regional decision making. They need to be considered now, or the New England states won't realistically be able to decarbonize, certainly not in time to meet their legal requirements, not to mention avoiding the worst impacts of climate change. We also need to address the costs and benefits that are considered at the regional level when making decisions, including impacts and benefits for communities. And we need to reform market design and how we value energy resources, such as clean energy as well as energy storage. Transmission is another key issue coming down the pike. For example, to get offshore wind to our homes and businesses, which is very exciting. We're going to need some new transmission to be planned, paid for, and built. The siting of transmission is up to each individual state, of course. It's not a federal matter, it's not a regional matter. Siting is a state-specific matter. But planning and operating the transmission system does take place at the regional level. In addition, in order to make sure that regional energy policies are keeping up with our communities and meeting the region's needs, we need to improve transparency and accountability at the regional level. So to start at the beginning, who are the key decision makers in this space? I will spend the next few minutes introducing 4 of those decision makers, specifically the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, ISO New England, NEPOOL, which used to be called New England Power Pool, and the states that you know so well, but also the organization that represents them at the regional level, which is the New England States Committee on Electricity. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is the federal agency that regulates the transmission and the sale of electricity in interstate commerce. So the states oversee utility activities that take place within a single state. That includes, for example, the siting of a power plant, as we discussed, or the electric bills that your utility sends to your home. But FERC is a federal agency, so its scope of authority is focused on activities that have impacts across multiple states. This includes the transmission of electricity across high voltage transmission lines between the states. It also includes the sale of electricity through regional markets. In New England, billions of dollars change hands in those regional markets. FERC also has some other duties that we won't discuss, including reviewing proposals for interstate gas pipelines and issuing permits for hydroelectric projects. FERC's leadership is comprised of 5 commissioners, all of whom are appointed by the president. Although the Trump administration may have been a little bit of an exception to the general rule, traditionally FERC has been less likely to dramatically change its approach with a change in presidential administrations than some other administrative agencies. This is in part because no more than 3 of the 5 FERC commissioners can be from a single political party. Of course, it's also because FERC commissioners have traditionally come from the industry and they are reluctant to shake it up too dramatically. While we're on the subject of FERC, I wanted to mention that one of the things the Biden administration has chosen to do is to establish a new office called the Office of Public Participation. The scope of this office's role is still evolving at the moment, but they now offer assistance to the public to facilitate participation in FERC dockets of proceedings. So if you contact the Office of Public Participation with a question, they will try to answer it. They will try to help you participate in FERC proceedings. And in the future, they may engage at the regional level, but that's remains to be determined. This is a map of the United States, and you can see up in the right top corner, ISO New England in green. ISO New England is the organization that plans and operates the electric grid in the New England region. ISO New England also runs the electricity markets in New England, and it creates the rules that govern those electricity markets. ISO New England ISO New England is the primary decision maker at the regional level. And I believe it likes to say that it doesn't set energy policy per se. I would tend to disagree with that. In my opinion, its decisions have really huge policy impacts. So they are in fact policy decisions. This map also shows you a number of other regions, each with a different color that represents other regional organizations that manage the electric grid and the markets in other parts of the country. So you can see in kind of an orangish brown color, New York's regional grid operator, NESCOE, PJM, those 3 letters right below, and that's the regional grid operator for the Mid-Atlantic, and so on. And there are a few regions that don't have a centralized grid operator. Those ones have no fancy acronyms. It's just they're the Northwest region, Southeast region, the Southwest region. This particular slide shows an image from ISO New England's website describing ISO New England's 3 main responsibilities: operating the electric grid and managing the electricity markets, as well as planning the power system. If you want to learn more about ISO New England, I encourage you to take a look at its website. Unfortunately, many of its meetings are not open to the general public due to secrecy rules and other longstanding practices, but there is a convenient calendar on its website that shows its meetings and provides links to public documents, including CEO reports from its president, grid and market updates, planned rule changes, and transmission planning materials. It does have several regular meetings that are open to the public, and you're welcome to attend those. You can also sign up to receive various updates, such as press releases via their website. ISO New England was established as what's called an independent system operator, or in some regions they call it a regional transmission operator, ISO RTO, for the region's electric system in 1997. But it wasn't until 2005 that it assumed its current scope of responsibilities. It has a board of directors that is elected through a nominations process. The nominations process includes some involvement by the existing board of directors, state representatives, and some industry stakeholders. The direction of the organization is partly set by its president and CEO, who is currently Gordon Van Wheely, who works with a staff of engineers, technical experts, and lawyers. He has been leading ISO New England for over 2 decades now, having started in his current position in 2001. ISO New England's regional decision-making process involves extensive consultation with a region-wide stakeholder group called NEPOOL. ISO New England also consults with the states, mainly through the state's joint regional representatives. We'll talk about them a little bit more in a minute. As I mentioned, ISO New England's website contains lots of information, including positions on market rules and other important decision points. However, these are generally presented in a highly technical way, not a user-friendly way. It's often very hard to read ISO New England's materials and to discern on the face of them what the impacts of what's being discussed would be on communities in New England or on climate and climate change. In general, ISO New England and its staff don't really talk about its decisions in terms of the impacts that they have on people or on the economy more generally. They generally talk about the impacts of their decisions on the energy grid specifically and on the energy markets, and avoid making broader conclusions or providing broader analysis. That leaves it up to the states or to other stakeholders to try to draw that picture, which honestly, they don't always do or don't always do very well. Before I move on from describing ISO New England's role, I just wanted to briefly provide a quick overview of the markets that I keep mentioning. So what are the regional markets? The main ones we're talking about are the capacity market and the energy market. The capacity market is designed as a way to ensure that we have enough of the right resources to meet our needs as a region. This process can take advanced planning, and in some cases, it requires developing brand new resources. So for that reason, this market looks forward 3 years in time in order to secure the resources that we think we will need in the future. For new resources, this market is especially important because it can help with securing financing and the momentum that you need to get a project done. Because this is a market that plans 3 years out, decisions we make now in this market do affect our energy mix for a long time into the future. The second regional market we're talking about is the energy market. The energy market is actually, it's for buying, selling, and trading electricity that is available on a near-term or essentially a live basis. Moving on to NEPOOL. NEPOOL is the stakeholder advisory group that I mentioned earlier. It gives input to ISO New England at regular meetings. Its meetings are not generally open to the public, and participants are not allowed to attribute any statements made at the meetings in the press or in the public. This group has actually existed for decades in order to coordinate on energy issues in New England. It actually existed long before ISO New England. It used to be called the New England Power Pool. However, NEPOOL's role as an official stakeholder advisory group to ISO New England was formally recognized by FERC in 2005. NEPOOL shares some power with ISO New England, partly because it pre-existed ISO New England and did some of the things that ISO New England now does, but also because its members own the transmission system and the generating units that serve the region. So that brings us to NEPOOL's members. So who are the stakeholders in NEPOOL? As this graphic shows, NEPOOL includes 6 main types of stakeholders from around New England. There are stakeholders from the electricity generation sector, you see up in the top left in the blue, transmission owners, publicly owned entities, that's in the purple, and that means, for example, municipal utilities. End users of electricity, like consumer advocates, that's down in the bottom right blue, and suppliers, like power marketers. There is also a broad category of stakeholders in the green called alternative resources that includes renewable energy companies and distributed generation aggregators. So that's aptly marked in green. My organization, Acadia Center, is actually a NEPOOL member under the end user category, the bottom right. And this means I can attend NEPOOL meetings to provide input on and also to vote on ISO New England proposals. As a NEPOOL member, I'm also subject to the same secrecy rules as other participants, which means I'm not allowed to report or attribute statements made in those meetings. But again, some of the materials in those meetings are made public. There are a few other advocacy organizations that also participate in the end user sector, again, that blue sector at NEPOOL, as well as consumer advocates and other consumers of electricity who primarily make up that particular group of stakeholders. So where do the states fit into this picture? The states are not part of NEPOOL, and they're also not part of ISO New England. But they do send representatives to the regional meetings that I described. And when those representatives express a position, their positions can be very influential. So that there's a joint body that collectively represents all the New England states at the regional level. And that joint body is called the New England States Committee on Electricity, or NESCOE for short. So it's a bit of a mouthful. If you participated in or followed the recent governor's energy vision statement process, that process was convened by NESCOE on behalf of the states. Although NESCOE is comprised of state representatives, it actually has a federally recognized role as a regional state committee, an official regional state committee that advises ISO New England, or provides input to ISO New England. In that role, it does attend ISO New England and NEPOOL meetings, where, as I said, it can offer opinions, analysis, positions, but doesn't vote. NESCOE generally tries to avoid taking positions that are not consensus positions. I think that's common knowledge, and I think they've expressly stated that they try to reach consensus as a group. So as a result, it can sometimes put forward positions that are a bit watered down or not that clear compared to the positions or opinions that you might get from one of the individual New England states. And that brings us to the end of our acronym soup. So FERC, NESCOE, ISO New England, and NEPOOL. All right. So taking a step back, I thought about what's the really short list of what we want as a region. And, many of these priorities are reflected in state laws. I think, as a region, we're looking for timely decarbonization in order to address climate change and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. We're looking for a reliable electric grid. We sometimes take that for granted, but it is really important. Robust clean energy, a robust clean energy industry, as well as jobs for New England's communities. And we want to reduce emissions with priority given to EJ communities and overburdened communities that have traditionally been subject to more pollution than other communities. And finally, we want to control costs, right? But not just the cost of energy, also the cost of climate and the costs of pollution. What are some of the barriers at the regional level to achieving these kinds of goals? I've summarized some of them here. First, the electric grid was actually physically designed for fossil fuels, and the market rules were also designed for fossil fuels. So moving towards clean energy requires a lot of changes in how we do things technically, as well as what incentives and policies we create, for example, to ensure reliability. Currently, I'd say there's very little ambiguity that the market rules prioritize and preference gas-fired power plants. Although ISO New England is ostensibly technology neutral, its CEO does often say that we need to rely substantially on gas for reliability into the indefinite future. He suggests that gas needs to continue in its substantial role until there are new technologies in place that are not available now, such as hydrogen, long-lasting energy storage, or modular nuclear units. I would just briefly point out that this is in tension with the opinion of some experts, many experts who have determined that until an electric grid reaches a higher level of penetration by renewable energy, meaning until we got a lot more clean energy on the grid, we can increasingly use clean energy as a reliability tool, including energy storage and better management of demand-side resources like distributed generation instead of gas. So we can increasingly move off of gas and move on to clean energy tools like energy storage and distributed generation. Overall, in New England, however, the momentum of the grid, the market rules that are in place now, the current power players, and the regional decision makers still largely favor gas to the disadvantage of clean energy. One of the reasons that the inequities favoring fossil fuels and disadvantaging clean energy haven't changed more quickly is, in my opinion, at least, a lack of connectedness between ICE in New England and the region's communities. Without that connectedness, including visibility into communities and community impacts and accountability to communities, I think it's very hard for an entity like ICE in New England to evolve, to meet evolving community needs. So as we evolve, it needs to evolve, but without that connection, it's challenging. Over the past couple of years, I would say that state energy leaders, who are, of course, more connected to New England's community, the state leaders have a direct connection to many communities in their states. They have started to push harder at the regional level for change. They've started pushing ISO New England. We saw that with the governor's energy vision process, for example. However, they're essentially trying to serve as a proxy for more direct accountability by ISO New England to the public. The next few slides show some trends that are related to gas in the region and also some trends at the national level. This slide is from ISO New England's website. You can see it shows that coal and oil use for electricity generation have dropped dramatically over the past 20 years. But at the same time, you can see that natural gas use has risen dramatically over that same period. And in 2021, renewable energy made up 10% of New England's grid energy. This slide similarly shows that emissions dropped over the past 20 years. However, if you look towards the end of the blue line, the most recent data appears to suggest that this trend is reversing. This slide shows something similar with coal emissions dropping over 20 years, but gas emissions and total emission rising in recent years. And finally, this slide shows not New England specific projections, but national projections produced by the U.S. Energy Information Agency. And the agency sees carbon dioxide emissions from coal continuing to go down for quite some time across the nation, which is a good thing. At the same time, they also project that carbon dioxide emissions from gas will continue to rise for decades. Emissions under this scenario would fall far short of what we need to achieve to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And to stop that projection from becoming a reality, we would need to rapidly change the trajectory we are on by switching to clean energy, as well as energy storage and demand management to increasingly replace gas. Some of the key things to know about gas are that New England is heavily over-reliant on gas in particular. In fact, the New England region is so over-reliant on gas that when Europe starts to import extra liquefied natural gas from the United States, ISO New England starts to worry that the electrical grid will go down, that we'll have blackouts. Gas prices can also spike dramatically during such periods, as they did when international markets for gas experienced higher demand this winter. That in turn drives much higher costs for electricity, as we also saw this winter. In addition to driving climate change, the emissions from fossil fuel plants are responsible for a host of negative health impacts, as you know, including premature death and childhood asthma. Health impacts from fossil fuels, including gas-fired power plants, tend to be experienced disproportionately by overburdened communities, as well as our children, who are more vulnerable. Some of the remedies for the region's over-reliance on gas include opening the markets to clean energy. So, we have the ability to remedy this over-reliance, and one of the tools that we have is to open the markets to clean energy. We can also plan the transmission infrastructure that we need to move the electricity produced by clean energy resources to where the electricity can be used, such as cities and towns. In addition, I would argue that we need to consider community impacts in our regional decision-making, and that this will have a big impact. We need to increase visibility, accountability, and transparency in order to make some change. This next slide essentially provides a few more technical terms for really the same concepts that we talked about in the last slide. So to make progress, we need to eliminate harmful regional rules that provide subsidies for gas, or exclude or discriminate against clean energy and energy storage, like, for example, the minimum offer price rule that has been in the news recently. We also need to value the specific benefits that clean energy offers, so that our markets will help drive emissions reductions, as well as taking advantage of those benefits. We need to integrate clean energy resources into the electric system in new and smarter, better ways, including by managing resources that can be found in homes increasingly across the region. Thermostats, everybody has a thermostat, many of them are smart thermostats, heat pumps, hot water heaters, and increasingly electric vehicle chargers. These types of resources can all be used to help manage and serve the electric grid. We also need governance reform and transparency at the regional level. And I've thrown in a few bullets there, kind of identifying some of the potential governance reforms. This slide touches on some things that I hope members of the audience will increasingly help with going forward. And I know many of you are probably already doing this work, so I thank you very much for that. We need increasing public awareness of regional energy issues, more communication, including more communication around major upcoming regional level reforms. We need to press our state leaders to represent the public's interests more consistently, more aggressively, and more effectively at the regional level. Mainly, that means the New England States Committee on Electricity needs to speak more aggressively on behalf of New England's state policies and communities to keep speaking up and be consistent in their positions. But we should also hold our individual states and our state utilities, frankly, our states and our state utilities responsible for their roles in regional decision making. Additionally, we do need to improve governance at the regional level, as I've said several times at this point. And this should include a bigger role for states in regional decision making. ISO New England actually says that it wants to maintain its independence from the states. So for that reason, it has rejected calls for a greater role for the states at the regional level. However, in other regions, state input is given a greater role. FERC should require that regional grid operators like ISO New England consider environmental justice and community impacts. And if FERC doesn't do that, the New England states should demand it or should raise those considerations in decision making and in discussions as stakeholders are evaluating the options. And both the states and ISO New England, in my assessment, should create more public forums for discussion of regional energy issues that affect the climate and communities in order to have more transparency, accountability, visibility, and communication about these issues. We need more public forums. The states have asked ISO New England to provide more. ISO New England has, kind of foot dragged on that, but the states can also provide those forums. So we need more from both directions. Finally, I wanted to close on a note of optimism. The reality is we have all the tools that we need to decarbonize. We're smart tool users, right? We've invented so many effective tools to decarbonize, and we will continue to develop more effective and cheaper tools as we go through this energy transition. The cost of our resources are coming down every year, and they're becoming more, efficient and effective. One recent sign of progress is that the states asked for, and ISO New England agreed to provide, a long-term study of what the regional electric system is likely to look like as we move through the steps of decarbonization and as we start to achieve state clean energy goals. That study that the states requested is called the 2050 Transmission Study. There's some information about it posted online already. They've got some preliminary results from the first stage of that. This study is the first of its kind in the region. And if the study is used right, it can help the region take the steps it needs to achieve both near-term and long-term clean energy goals. There are also very large amounts of clean energy and energy storage on the horizon. As soon as we start to provide value to them, those resources can start to provide value to us. So, for example, there are thousands of megawatts of energy storage sitting in ISO New England's queue, which means they're hoping to come online. There are new ways to virtually aggregate, to combine the benefit from efficient devices in our homes. I talked a little bit earlier about how you can use thermostats, hot water heaters, other types of common devices that are found in our homes. And we have ways to combine those all together to become a larger resource for the grids. And it's a great resource because it's very flexible, right? It's low cost, it's efficient, it's flexible, it provides value to people's homes as well as to the grid at the same time. That is a groundbreaking development as well. And it can help us to use fewer power plants on hot days and cold nights. There's also increasing public attention to these issues. This includes attention to regional reform issues from members of the press. The Boston Globe now has a really groundbreaking climate desk covering climate issues, including regional issues like these. It also includes increasing attention by environmental justice communities who are starting to be able to engage on some of these issues, church groups who are starting to be able to engage, and other communities across New England who are starting to be able to engage. And so all of these signs point to real progress, and we have so many tools available to us that the future is bright, but we need to keep working. With that, I will stop sharing my screen.
Well, Melissa, thank you. Thank you very much. You've covered a lot of territory there, and there are a lot of great questions in the Q&A box. Just would like to remind all participants to please put your questions in the Q&A box. Before I launch into the questions that we've got building up, one thing I'd like to just sort of comment on is it feels very much like it is such a closed system that is run primarily by industry stakeholders. You mentioned the need to get, and when I say industry, yeah, the industry basically. And ISO New England, for one, seems to resist efforts to sort of break through that and open it up a little as a process. Could you give an example? I guess two things. Could you give an example of what effective stakeholder involvement beyond what currently consists of stakeholder involvement would look like? And also, are there any models? I understand that we're talking about ISO New England and its own organization of agencies, et cetera. But are there any models elsewhere in the state that are doing it that we can turn to as models that are doing the job more appropriately, with more openness, more transparency, and more of a vision for the future?
Thank you. So first, I know that ISO New England would defend itself a little bit from the accusation that it's trying to keep things secret. Actually, they would defend themselves a lot from that accusation. And one of the things that they would say is that actually it's NEPOOL's rules that require secrecy, not, that require non-attribution and non-public participation at their meetings. Technically, it is NEPOOL's rules. Of course, ISO New England, participates in that process. So there are other regions where the version of NEPOOL that they have doesn't require secrecy and doesn't limit participation as much as participation is limited here. So that would be a big difference. Other differences would include some things that exist in other regions now, but some things that don't, and really reflect the fact that we're engaging in an energy transformation right now. And that goes partly towards what I was suggesting in terms of seeing the stories of the impacts. So these decisions are made on technical bases largely, and they're not made on human bases. So part of that is because I think we're not connected to the communities when we sit in those rooms and an engineer gets up and gives a PowerPoint presentation about the technical aspects of the energy grid. We need to have more connectedness through more public participation and more transparency. The states have pushed on this a little bit recently, asking ISO New England to simplify some of its publications so that people can understand it without being an engineer, without being an economist. And so that they can understand the impacts. I think it's not just simplifying, it's actually also putting things in context, telling the story of how this relates to our region in a way that's meaningful. I think it would also honestly help the decision makers themselves to realize what outcomes they're producing from the decisions that they're making. So does that help a little bit, Lana? Lana, I think you're on mute.
Yes, the mute button is my nemesis. So yes, it does. Thanks, Melissa. We've really got a nice buildup of questions in the queue. Everyone, I will try to get to all of your questions. They may not be in exact order, but there was a reference that you made to the climate desk, and someone was interested because they, I believe, broke the story. I believe it was Sabrina Shankman who broke the story around the minimum offer price rule and ISO New England's last minute decision. Could you speak a little bit to that decision? There is someone who would like a little more information about that minimum offer price rule.
Sure, and I don't know if the question is more around the rule itself, the current status of that, or the stakeholder process that took place. But essentially what happened was actually, we could go back in history a little further. The minimum offer price rule is a rule that has the impact of providing a subsidy to incumbent gas power plants in the capacity market, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And it excludes clean energy, which it refers to as state-sponsored resources. It was originally intended, the idea of a minimum offer price was originally intended to avoid market manipulation, but its impact was to exclude all clean energy resources that receive any kind of recognition for their clean energy attributes, whether it's renewable energy credits or tax benefits or other types of power purchase agreements. Those clean energy resources that get any kind of recognition from governmental sources for their clean energy benefits are excluded because they essentially create an artificial price for them. And they say, well, we know you're bidding down here, but actually we think you should be bidding up here if you included all these other things that, you know, if you weren't a clean energy resource. So in any event, it's an artificial market rule that keeps clean energy from even being able to really participate in general in the capacity market. And because the capacity market helps to build new resources, it's a problem. It also means that we pay twice for capacity, because everything in the capacity market is what ISO New England thinks we need, but we're also going to pay for the clean energy we need to meet state mandates and decarbonize. So the process with that went back quite a long time, where the states were asking ISO New England to get rid of this rule for a long time. Finally, in May, ISO New England proposed getting rid of it in the next, not the capacity auction, if you've heard about it, we just had a capacity auction, but there would be another one coming up next year. And it would be in time to remove that rule from the capacity auction next year. We went through the process of stakeholder engagement, which involved lots of meetings, PowerPoints, discussions, proposed amendments to ISO New England's proposal, and analysis of various sorts from May through this winter. And then kind of at the last minute, really a week before the final vote, ISO New England changed its position and said, actually, we'll delay this for 2 years. And because, as I explained earlier, the forward capacity market plans for 3 years out, that has an impact that's long-term. So they are proposing now, submitting a proposal to FERC probably next week, I would guess. By the end of the month, I would guess, to delay that process. And that's where we stand with the minimum offer price rule. There are 2 other regions that have already moved to eliminate it. We're the last ones with that discriminatory rule.
There were a lot of questions about MOPR, and I'm just wondering, and one question was, what is the leverage for changing that MOPR rule or decision?
Once ISO New England files its proposal at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the commission will open a docket. And parties can submit comments. They can say, you know, this position of ISO New England is flawed for X, Y, and Z reasons. You should do something else. In addition, even to the lead up to filing that proposal at FERC, there have been folks talking to the FERC commissioners and saying, oh, this is what you should do. That's what you should do. We think this, we think that, providing background. In terms of leverage that folks on this call could exert, you know, I suggest that you contact your states and say, can you speak up in the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission docket? Can you take a position that supports eliminating this discriminatory rule that's keeping energy storage, keeping offshore wind out of our capacity market? Can you take a position at FERC that really takes a strong stand for clean energy, for decarbonization now, instead of delaying it? And the reason why ISO New England said they wanted to delay it was to basically keep gas in the market at the current levels for longer. And that's not acceptable.
Right. And I believe there was a rally at the Common last week around this very issue. And I think Senator Markey is looking rather closely at this issue and has a bill out, frankly. A couple of questions about storage, energy storage technologies. Can you comment on what is ready to go and most effective right now? And also, can you provide some specific examples that illustrate the, quote, unprecedented levels of energy storage waiting to enter the markets?
Sure. So there are thousands of megawatts of energy storage in what's called the ISO New England queue, which means they're planning to develop and come online and hopefully enter the markets to the extent that we have markets that will be open for them. Now, some energy storage can get built anyway, especially if it's supported by the states. If it combines, with distributed generation, for example, which we have strong state programs for. But most energy storage, by and large, would really benefit greatly by having a capacity market that is open to energy storage more than it is now, including energy storage paired with solar and other clean energy resources. In addition, it would be very helpful to have, for example, a forward clean energy market that values clean energy attributes, because that would also help us to move off of gas for reliability and move on to energy storage, because energy storage can serve some similar purposes for reliability as load management and flexible load can for our grid. Specific types of energy storage, I think your question asked about specific types of energy storage. So there are different types. Most of them are not what is called long duration storage, which is kind of what ISO New England said we need to get off of gas. Long duration storage would last for a long time by definition. What we mostly have now is 4-hour energy storage, for example, but that especially when combined with multiple resources can also serve similar purposes. And a lot of energy storage is paired with clean energy, but you can also have large-scale standalone energy storage. For example, there's an energy storage developer that is anticipating that we will eventually get offshore wind in certain areas of the region. And so they're working to build energy storage that in the future can store the energy from offshore wind.
Thank you. A lot of people want to know what to do. And you made a comment about contact your state. Well, at what level of the state are we talking? The governor, Secretary of Energy, what DOER rather, what is it that you would recommend in terms of the specific state level person, administrator, or agency that the people should contact?
The governor's office and his administration are the appropriate contacts for this kind of subject. So the governor's office, the secretary are both appropriate.
Okay, great, thank you. Because someone commented that Mass EEA is accepting comments on the draft Clean Energy and Climate Plan, and would it be appropriate to submit comments in that venue, or should it be just done as a standalone, separate effort?
Yeah, I think it's a separate effort from that.
Right, thank you. Okay. Well, someone asked what your top 2 or 3 favorite state bills that help us move away from fossil fuels toward clean energy might be, if you want to answer that. Otherwise, do you have some?
To punt on that one, Lana, because I am focused on the regional level, not on the state level, although I could try to get into some of that.
Good try. Okay, what is the outlook for nuclear energy in New England? Is ISO New England considering this as an option? Do you know?
So I mentioned the concept of modular nuclear earlier. It's emphasis on concept because it's not something that's currently available in practice, but there's a concept that maybe in the future it could serve some additional purposes in the region. And ISO New England often mentions it, but it's more of a holy grail type concept than something that we're actually planning.
Okay, question about, can you The whole issue of interconnectedness in the grid, the transmission system. I know a lot of people have talked about that and how important it is to build that up. Can you speak a little to the notion of interconnectedness and basically being able to branch beyond a small area so that we can reach the communities that really need the clean energy as we move forward? The importance of the transmission grid.
Right. So the transmission system is important because that's our highway for getting electricity from one place to another. As we develop new resources like offshore wind, we need to get it to the endpoint where we can use it. Some of that can be done off in the ocean, and some of it will need to be done on land. Sometimes we can use existing transmission and repurpose it or strengthen it, essentially reconductor it and rejigger it so that it serves new and purposes and can transmit some additional electricity. We can also work to avoid transmission investments, including through non-transmission alternatives like increased demand management and distributed generation. We can also consider repurposing transmission capacity that is freed up if power plants that are fossil fuel based are retired, or power plants that aren't being used very much are retired and replaced with other resources. Then we can help to avoid some transmission investments. But everyone predicts that we will need substantial transmission investments in order to get our new clean energy resources where they need to go. A lot of the transmission that already exists is being used for other purposes, and we can, as I mentioned already, try to repurpose it, but we'll probably need to build some more. On top of that, one really important thing is to make sure that we're connected well to other regions. Right. Because when we have storms, when we have events that take place affecting New England, those may not be affecting our neighbors. Likewise, they can benefit from interconnectedness with us because we can provide them with help when things happen that are locally, impacting them. So that interregional interconnection is interconnectedness, if you want to put that way, is also important. But one of the ways that we want to move forward on transmission right now is to transition from thinking about transmission as one-off projects and start looking at it in a more holistic way. If we can plan ahead and say our decarbonization goals are to achieve this, how can we maximize 3 transmission lines to achieve those goals, instead of each individual goal having its own transmission line, essentially. By combining the benefits into fewer projects, we can save time, we can save money, we can save impacts on communities.
How do we make that happen? Because that sounds very smart.
So there is a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission docket right now discussing this subject, and they are about to launch soon a rulemaking where they will put this concept into a rule. At least I hope that's what we'll see when they release their new draft rule. And I will be, I'm sure, commenting on that, and other folks in the region, including ISO New England, will be weighing in on how that new process should go. Hopefully what happens is that we start to see a more rational process where ISO New England, for example, doesn't just say, well, we need this project for reliability, so we're going to go ahead and build it, but we're going to ignore all the clean energy that's nearby that also needs some transmission. So we can change that so that when we do one project, we can achieve multiple benefits, providing a lower total cost overall.
Right, thank you. So we still have a lot of questions out there that we have not been able to get to. I want to thank everyone for submitting their questions. Tried to get to as many of them as I could. I'm just wondering, for people who want to know more about this in terms of what they can do or what we can do, and kind of get updated in a way that is comprehensible to us more as lay people, where should we go? Should we check the Acadia Center? Are there other resources that you think would be the best resources for us so that we can stay tuned in to what's happening?
Sorry, still on mute. That's a great question. I am hoping that this will be an issue that maintains its status in the press, and we continue to have these conversations in a very public way. I also encourage folks to sign up for ISO New England's press releases. Diving into their website is a little bit arcane, to say the least, but watching their press releases. I also encourage you to sign up for Acadia Center's newsletters, and you can do that on our website. I would be happy to talk with folks at other community meetings and in other forums as well about more specific issues and developments that come up down the road.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we have any way of saving the Q&A. Karen, you were helping technically. I don't know if we can save the questions, but I think it would be good to have them to refer to, because we may be able to use that in the future. And with that, we are going to have to sign off, but we need.
Thank you so much for having me, Hannah.
Oh, Melissa, thank you so much for being here. A lot of information. And I hope that most people's questions got answered, but I know they have a lot more. So Karen, if I can see the last slide, that'd be great. Okay, I just want to once again mention that this presentation was provided by or sponsored by the League of Women Voters in Massachusetts and also Elders Climate Action of Massachusetts. And Elders Climate Action they work to advocate for clean climate for our grandchildren and all children in the future. And if you want more information about the League, we have similar goals. And Elders Climate Action, you have the websites right there. I want to thank everyone for participating in this tonight and for your really excellent questions. Big topic, important topic. Thank you very much for being here.